Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Board of Supervisors School Board Work Session for February 3rd, 2015. And here we all gathered again to kind of discuss a very important matter, subject within York County. Is our top priority is in our school system. So this will be really good. Now, you want to call your...
Yeah, at this time, I'll call our school board work session to order in our joint meeting with the Board of Supervisors, and that's all we need to do to make it official.
Okay, and we'll have a roll call from Board of Supervisors. Alan?
Mr. Zaremba?
Here.
Mrs. Knoll?
Here.
Mr. Wiggins?
Here.
Mr. Richack?
Here.
Mr. Shepherd?
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
thank you very much. Okay, we'll, the order, we will have a presentation by Mark Carter and then our new superintendent. I gotta quit calling you new. You get old too quick.
fast.
Dr.
Pretty
Sandor
gray.
will then follow it up with a presentation at school. So Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, sir. I have just two very brief slides. You all saw these at your meeting on Friday. We are very early in the budget process on the county side, compiling numbers and looking at requests that have come in. This is what we have right now in terms of the preliminary revenue outlook, the combination of real estate and personal property tax revenue growth. It amounts to about $161,000. Other taxes and fees about $621,000. Right now, what it looks like in terms of state funding changes will be down on the deficit side $148,000 or so. We're still holding our fingers crossed that there will be no other detrimental state actions, but revenue growth is around $630,000, which is very, very modest. We are looking at debt service requirements and whether there's an opportunity to have any opportunity to use any capacity that's coming offline in terms of debt service payments. So bottom line is we still have a bunch of question marks in terms of the revenue outlook. In terms of expenditure issues, about the only number we know at the moment is what it looks like in terms of health insurance premium increases for the employer share of the county health program, and that's a little bit over $500,000. Of course, the other expenditure issues that are certainly priorities for consideration as we move forward will be the education, the schools funding, employee compensation on both the school and the county side, the capital improvements program, again, both on the county and school side, and then again, the big question mark about any other state actions or impacts that may come down the pike. And then we're also looking, obviously, at certain programs and services. We'll have fee increases or increases in cost just due to cost escalation, or some are controlled by formulas that are based on population and other factors, so we have to roll those into the considerations as well. Again, bottom line, I'm sorry, at this point in time, we just have lots of question marks, but again, it's very early in the process, and of course, we'll be working over the next several weeks and right up until the release of the budget and the budget recommendation in March, the second meeting in March. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Shandor.
Well, before you go any further, is there any questions at this point? All right, great, go ahead.
And Dr. Shandor, do you want us to hold our questions until we finish the presentation also, like we just did with Mr. Carter?
That'd be great. I've got about 13 or 14 slides I'd like to work through, and then at the end we can open up for
Do we have a
comments
copy
and
of the
questions.
slides by any
I
chance?
didn't bring a copy of the slides. So.
Yes, no, we can email those to you.
And I can
Great,
send-
thank you very much.
We'll email it to everybody.
Okay, let me get the mouse working here. All right, as I begin this presentation, I want to first thank Mr. Jarrett, our Chief Finance Officer, for his expertise and leadership in the area of budget development. He has many years of experience, and his high level of attention to detail, I can tell you, looking at every dollar that we get and every dollar that we spend, he does a great job, and he's really been instrumental in helping me prepare this information and prepare the budget. All right, the first thing I want to just lay out before I jump into the meat of the presentation is that this presentation only represents preliminary information that will be used to guide the development of the budget. The budget, the superintendent's proposed operating budget will be issued in mid-February. Okay. Looking at this first slide, I want to begin this evening with reminding both boards and the community of our budget journey through the last 6 years. I know everyone around this table knows a lot of this information, but I want to make sure that I share it for the community as well. From 2010 to 2013, the state revenue we received during this 4-year period was decreased, which impacted the school division to the tune of $9.2 million. So during this time frame, we provided no raises, no step increases, and no position regrades. Now, in 2014, we were able to provide a 2% raise, not including the 2% shift which was mandated by the state for VRS purposes, and again, no step increases. In 2015, state revenue increased by $2 million. Now, on the surface, this looks great. However, of that $2.9 million, $1.8 million of it went to the VRS state mandate.
Can you just back it up? I'm trying to digest that last bit there.
Okay. This next slide is just a recap, again, looking at total staff reductions. So in 2010, 2013, 124 permanent positions were cut during that time. As you can see, in 2014, 19 permanent positions were cut, and in 2015, 16 permanent positions were cut. So in total, 159 permanent positions were cut, again, due to state reductions. This next slide, sorry for the small font size, wanted to provide some examples of some of the unrestored cuts that have impacted the school division. So I'll give you just a few seconds to take a look at those. This next slide, wanted to again, as a superintendent, you're always promoting your school division, and wanted to provide some highlights again from the work at YCSD. We're one of only 22 school divisions in the state of Virginia to be fully accredited, and I've mentioned that at the last session, and I'll tell everyone who will listen.
One of
So I think
22?
one of 22 in the state of Virginia that are fully accredited. All of our middle
Out of
schools.
how many divisions?
134.
134, yeah.
All middle schools exceeded the state average for science performance. And then when you look at our class of 2014, they exceeded the state and national averages on the SAT, which again is an impressive statistic. Our on-time graduation results exceeded state averages as well, and YCSD's grad rate is 94.5%. The state average is 89%. Okay, as we're expecting an increase of 250 students based on our projections for next year, this slide is critically important. With that said, due to increases in enrollment this current year, we added 4 regular ed teachers above what was originally budgeted. We will need an additional 4 more for 2016. In FY15, we also added 4 special ed teachers, again above what was originally budgeted, and we'll need 2 more for FY16. As a reminder, these special education positions are a federal and state requirement. We will need to also add 2 regular paras for FY16 and an additional $20,000 for materials and supplies. So a preliminary revenue outlook. As you can see, our revenue outlook for FY16 from the governor's proposed budget, we're looking at, from state, a little over $1 million. Federal aid, and that's impact aid, will be losing $300,000. DOD heavily impacted, we're gaining over $71,000. And again, at this point, the county contribution is unknown. And we'll also receive a little over $50,000 in local miscellaneous. So that's putting us for a total of just over $869,000. This brings me to my FY16 budget priorities, and we discussed these a little bit at the last joint session. And those 3 are staff compensation, transportation, and technology. Those are my 3 priorities. Now, we've thoroughly reviewed the budget, and we've also identified areas of reduction. So before I dive into these priorities, I want to quickly review these areas. So on this slide, you're looking at $1.8 million of reductions. Now, that's through attrition, health insurance, and VRS reductions based on the governor's proposed budget. So now let's dive into the priorities. So as I shared again at the last session, my main responsibility as superintendent is our workforce, and that's the people who work in our school division. The other thing I want to make clear to both boards and the public is, please understand that the items on these slides are not my recommendations. These are purely for informational purposes. So for licensed staff, the cost for providing a step for all licensed staff is $725,000, and that equates to an average of 1.4%. The scale adjustment reflects a 0.6% increase, which is $291,000, so for combined 2%. Then I move down to non-licensed staff, and a step for that group of employees costs $525,000, which is equivalent to an average of a 2% increase. Now, I also wanted to share what the cost was for restoring a step for staff. So this reflects the cost for restoring one step for all eligible staff members who are eligible to have 5 steps restored. So under this assumption, the cost of a restored step for those eligible licensed staff members is $506,000, which equates to an average of 1.04%. For non-licensed staff, the cost is $402,000 for an average of 1.46%. For priority number 2, again, this was some information that I shared at the last session. As you know, in our bus fleet, we have 169 total buses. Presently, we have 23, which are over 14 years old or have over 200,000 miles. This is an area that we've had to reduce in recent years in order to protect the classroom. We're looking at utilizing funds to replace buses over the next several years in order to get us back on track with our normal replacement cycle. Finally, we also need to address the life expectancy of our technology infrastructure, such as storage systems and servers. As technology supports major classroom tools such as Aspen, Benchmark, and SOL testing, this area is a priority. In summary, in looking at staff compensation, transportation, and technology needs, it's important for me to share that the need in each of these areas is substantially greater than the preliminary information I'm sharing and providing this evening. However, I realize and understand our current economic status and will strongly advocate for the needs, understanding that over time, we'll be able to gradually move to where we need to be in these areas. So I'll open up to questions and comments at this time. Thank you.
Why don't you take it back to, let's go back to to the slides, and we can
Yep.
kind of hit, because there was questions all through
Sure,
there.
absolutely.
Okay, let's go back to the first slide. Okay, so the back it up. That 11.7, I didn't quite understand it. You got 9.2 or 11.7. What does 11.7 apply to?
VRS,
If including.
Mr.
Okay,
Shepherd.
got it.
including.
If I could explain that to you, the way that was put together was, we also had the mandate to increase the VRS percentage that we were paying, so we considered that to be effectively a draw on local dollars, and that's why it's done like that.
Because I just remember the around 11 million number from previous years, and I ain't quite, that 9.2 is the one that actually.
Well, here's a question, I think, if I can ask you, Chair.
Sure, please.
A layperson might think that, well, geez, if you're required to increase the contribution to the VRS, isn't that an increase in the benefit to the school employee?
Well, actually, it did not increase the benefits, because their benefits are set by the VRS.
So what is the increase to the VRS for?
It's to make the state fund fully funded, because it's been underfunded for a number of years now.
It cuts across the entire.
That's across the entire state. All VRS groups that are enrolled in VRS were underfunded. And that really goes back, the teacher pool, which is the pool we're talking about here, was really grossly underfunded, if I could say that, because it was actually the subject of a lot of things that goes on in the General Assembly, because there's a revenue component with the SOQ cost dealing with VRS. So what that meant is, if the General Assembly raised the rate for VRS, then they would have to pay more money to local school divisions. So in years past, they would jockey that rate around to also manipulate the amount of revenue they had to give to school divisions. So, but the long and short of it is this: there finally became a realization this fund is underfunded. So this, I give credit to this General Assembly because they decided, okay, it's time to fully fund this, and they put together a plan over, I think it was 5 to 7 years to fully fund it. And we're still in that plan. In fact, I would expect, this was the second year of that rate increase. I would expect next year another rate increase to continue that path to get this thing fully funded. They've already warned us about that.
So I guess the benefit, Mr. Superintendent, to all the school division employees across the Commonwealth is there's now assurance, or there soon will be assurance, that indeed there will be retired pay.
Well, yeah, yeah.
You hear my message?
Yes.
Okay.
This is like Social
So-
Security.
Yeah.
Right.
So, okay, yeah, thanks for that explanation.
Yes, you're welcome, Mr. Summer.
Sheila, do you have a question?
I did, I think, because we look at this and we talk about the shortage in VRS, but that doesn't mean that a teacher retiring will not get the full retirement that they're
Yes, ma'am,
due.
you're exactly right.
That's one of the
Please.
things I
That's what
think
I'm saying.
everybody needs to understand, that the teachers will get the retirement that they were promised when they signed on.
Yes, ma'am, that's very critical. Now, I will say VRS did institute a new plan. It's called the hybrid plan. And so if you're a new employee coming on, your benefits are not as rich as someone that has been on the plan for years. But when you sign up, that's what you agree to do.
That's
what
exactly
you agree
right.
to
When
do.
you sign up, you're not going to be shorted at
No,
the
ma'am,
end.
you are not. That's exactly right. Thank you
Thank
for that
you.
clarification.
Or you guys have any questions? One question on the VRs. You said it was fully funded, this was going to fully fund
No,
it.
sir, it will not fully
It's
fund
$17
it.
billion in the
No,
hole.
no, sir.
but,
No, sir, I didn't say that. What I said was they're on a plan to fully fund this over a period, and I don't recall if it's 5 or 7 years. We're still in the middle of that.
Okay.
They're going to be at the next biennium when this thing comes, when they redo the evaluation. I expect these rates to go up again.
So we will then have to be, we'll be paying, they'll do another deal like they did with the 5% pay increase to help offset that pay?
No,
Contribution?
to my knowledge, they're not talking about increasing the employee contribution. That will stay the way it is.
All
But
right.
what will happen is the employer rate will go up. Now, that's a good point, though, I should mention. The General Assembly has the authority to say, we will increase the employee share. They could do that. A year from now, they could say, instead of 5%, employees are now going to pay 6%, 7%. That is always a possibility. That is.
Then offset it with a pay increase?
Well, not
If
necessarily
that's what they
then.
choose to do.
They could, but
I mean, that's what they did last time. Okay, back up.
Oh, I just went to the next slide. I thought you were at it.
Any other questions on this particular slide? Okay, next.
Yeah.
That was last year.
Yep.
Okay. Have you completed your 5-year,
got one more.
this year?
This year.
Coming up? Okay, so this will be in your budget? Okay.
Yes, we have to do it. It's our last.
Last year?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
If the, is this the total, is this the one slide for fiscal year 14, or there
Yes.
is it?
This is just for 14.
Okay, if the state increased the revenue to the school division by $300K, and your total operation budget increased by 1.2 mil,
So your difference is.
how was the difference made up? How'd you meet the shortfall?
Yes, sir. That was a combination of things. One way was the school board, those reductions that you saw earlier on the screen, that was one of the mechanisms. Another mechanism was during that year, you also increased the contribution to the schools. So those two things were what made up that difference to allow for that third bullet, which is a 2% adjustment.
Questions? Okay, next slide.
This is this past year. Or current year, sorry.
Now, that was the increase for the school, 1.8 million because of the VRS rate for that.
The mandate,
Okay,
yes.
mandate.
And so, in other words, we're in 15 now, right?
Right.
That's what they did last, in the last budget discussions we had.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now we go to the FY16 budget.
Now, I guess the question I had, about a month ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, there was an article, I think it was the Daily Press, recognizing it's an article in the press, which is not anything official, but it was lauding both the York County and the York County School Division for coming out of fiscal year, I want to say 14, with budget excesses. In other words, the budget was here, but the revenues were here, and you wound up with, the county wound up with about $1.5 million in round numbers, according to this article, and the school division, if I'm not mistaken, also wound up with a surplus of about $1 million or so. Does anybody recall the article?
I do, Mr. Zaremba. And actually, the school division ended up with about $335,000 in funds that were left over strictly in the operating budget. And that article was very complimentary of the county as well as the school division, because it looked at the budgeted revenues and the budgeted expenditures. And in both cases, I think it was we proved to be, our budgeting proved to be pretty much on site.
So my question to not just the school division, of course, when we get into the county budget, where'd that money go? What would we do with that money? You're
Well,
smiling, but.
I will tell you, for the school division, the 335, you have historically given that back to us for technology, the $335,000, and I believe you've done that recently.
That's what I was going to say.
Vivian, would you like to?
So are you making up the technology through that surplus?
To avoid being too brief about this, let me just say $335,000 for the need for technology in our division. It helps, but it's not going to take us all the way. Right now, we estimate, in order to get all of our infrastructure up to where it should be, get it refreshed, and also get our computer technology refreshed, we're looking at probably about $1.4 million of need over and above what we have in the budget now. Dr. Shandor had a slide up there earlier that did not come close to that. That's why when he mentioned that, this is not going to fully fund technology. So the 335 is a part of that. So that goes into the mix of meeting those balances.
But I mean, if you're that good on a year-to-year basis, and you wind up with 200,000, 300,000, whatever, I don't expect it going back, for the last decade or something like that. If there were any semblance of these kinds of excesses, I would hope that if not the whole school division's requirement, that some of those requirements can be met, such as technology is one of the three.
Absolutely.
Question?
Walt, let me just add to the,
Yeah.
we as a school board have to, we have to have a balanced budget. We can't go by red, by law. So, but one thing that we do is we also have like special ed needs, where a student will come to us and we have to have the funding to hire the teacher or do something. So we have to be real cautious about, we want that year-end, surplus or leftover, because if we don't have that, if we get hit with some expenditure, special and special education areas, we could end up having to come to you as a governing body going, we're running out, we're over. So Dennis does a real good job monitoring as we go throughout the year if we have to move dollars and things to shift for something. But we got this great relationship with the Board of Supervisors, y'all, that say, okay, we will have, consistently have some monies left over at the end of the year, and y'all have always rolled it back to technology for us to use.
My point, that's my point. If we're getting surpluses in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, I would hope that not only special ed kinds of requirements, but the technology requirement, which is a very important one, is in part being met on an annual basis, just like the VRS 5-year.
Yeah, right.
No, we're not meeting it this year, but over the 5 or 7 year period, VRS, the General Assembly hopes to have the kitty full.
Yes.
Meet all of its requirements. I'm just saying, in no way are we telling you how to spend your money, but
Right.
if you're getting this kind of pocket change year in and year out, of course, there's a smart way to spend it.
Right.
Ms. Knoll?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Shepherd. Dennis, historically, have we not always had some surplus? Because you cannot figure a budget right down to the penny, and you'd rather figure your budget
Mrs. Knoll, let me tell you.
Conservatively, am I
The
not right?
consequences of not having a surplus at the end of the year are consequences we do not want to entertain.
That's exactly right.
And so I won't even go into that, so you can expect a surplus from the school
Exactly.
division every
And-
year,
and
as you
his-
can with the county as well.
Right,
So
and historically.
Yes, ma'am.
The surplus has, I think, gone back to the schools
Yes, ma'am.
to use for technology, I
Yes.
think. And also, the money that the county has left over every year goes back into the CIP for one-time expenditure. So that is always the way it has been. I don't ever remember not having something at the end of the day.
Trust me, that is the goal.
Right.
When we start this budget process at the beginning of July, that planning begins right then. We're going to have a balance at the end of the year.
Yes.
We will have one, yes, ma'am.
Well, I think historically, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the amount of money over, if you go back 10 years or so, historically, you end up with about $500,000 right in there. And then for the budget planning, when we're looking at about $130 million budget, we end up around $1 million, which puts us on the plus side, and that falls over into our contingency fund, which we, use for hurricanes and stuff like that, so. And you guys don't put that in your budget as a reliable source of revenue, do you?
Not in the operating
Okay.
budget, no, sir.
I just wanted to make sure. 'Cause I remember that discussion last year, so, okay. Any other questions on this slide? Okay. Did you have to increase number of students in per
Yeah,
classroom?
we actually had we budgeted this year 12,420 students, and we actually are hovering right now between 12,500 and 12,525. And so that was why we've had to add teachers this year beyond what was budgeted. So yes, that's a good thing. I know there's a downside to having more students and that there's more cost associated with that. But if I had to choose between going down in number of students and going up, I'll take the going up anytime, because at least you're growing and you are getting the additional state revenue with that, and that helps offset other additional cost as well. Even though there is a financial burden as students come in, and you're dealing with that right now with a potential request for an elementary school. And that's what happens, as over time, those things will start catching up with you, and then you have infrastructure costs associated with it.
Any questions on this issue? I know that the number of students that were coming in was a bit of a surprise, and the number, but
It was.
there's things like that occur, and our staff's been pretty good about it in the planning department. Been very good in the past, and it sort of predicted that too. I think because of the uncertainty at the time that you get your planning figures. So.
Yes, sir.
Okay, next. Now, when you talk about the unrestored cuts, these are categories.
Right, these are positions that haven't been put back in over the past 6 years.
Right.
Now, I remember this discussion before, we used the word textbook, and it doesn't really convey what you're talking about. I mean, I remember we had this big discussion about what you do with textbook and how they used to do it back in the dark ages, but you're not talking about textbooks. So I wish you quit using that term. It's a teaching material, and it's a lot more than textbooks, right? I mean, I went to the tour, I saw the,
Well, textbooks are part of it. I
yeah,
mean,
just part of it, right?
We're on, what, a 13-year cycle? I mean, you saw the textbooks when we went over to.
I saw books and stuff. I want to convey that point, because that was an issue it was really kind of a strange discussion we were having, and a lot of us thought you were talking about the books, and that's just one part of it. It's a lot of different material that's involved here.
Resources and materials for students,
Yes.
absolutely.
Sometimes when the textbooks come in, they send material with those textbooks, which you see other components,
Online material real often for a
and
certain
other
period.
workbooks and things that go with the main textbooks.
Your consumables, but when we adopt a textbook line, basically, that's when, like Dr. George had a 13-year cycle, but when we put all the energy as a school division with a lot of staff reviewing a lot of different companies that have different lines of textbooks and such, and we adopt a new reading model or something, it does. So textbooks is a term we use, because even though they come with the consumables, the workbooks, the kids that work out, and they have to be replaced each year by buying more, primarily the word textbook is this division used just because that's the one that's continued to be used over and over and over.
Well, if the discussion comes up, I mean, after the tour and everything, I'm in understanding that we're not really just talking about textbooks, that was just one little piece. So, I mean, I caught that, okay. This number, is this covering what period of time? Just last year or the whole, about the cycle there?
6-year period.
Six-year
cycle,
period,
okay.
right.
Okay. Any other questions?
That
on
makes more sense.
Yeah, okay. We're real proud of the work that everyone has done on the school side. That's really outstanding. There's a lot of kudos and a lot of why people come here, okay? Question on special ed. I understand that on average, that special ed costs the schools about $250,000. Is that true?
Depends on the
What do we
numbers.
totally
Yeah.
spend on
Depends on
special
the
ed?
number of students.
Yeah, it's per student. That's $250,000 a year per student?
Per student?
I mean, I'd heard that
Sorry, that's
number, and
not-
I just thought
I
it
don't think
was
so.
pretty,
No.
Let me put it in a different perspective
Okay.
for you. We spend probably about $14 to $15 million a year on special ed services, and we have approximately, I'd say, 12 to 1,300 special ed
oh,
students.
well,
How-
that's,
how many
okay, that's
students?
usually
12 to
different.
13.
Now, what you're thinking about is we can have a situation where one student can cost us $100,000. It's
Sure
depending
you
upon the
can.
level of their severity of
You have to put 'em in a
disability.
home.
That is a possibility,
But they require
but
para.
in general speaking, that's
Okay,
not the
oh,
case.
good, I'm glad you said that, because I'd been under the impression that there was,
Almost 10%.
okay. Any questions on the slide from
Well.
supervisors?
More
Okay.
desirable.
Got a question on this one.
Right.
What prompted the decrease in the federal impact aid?
Yeah, that's one you haven't seen in a long time, frankly. We've kind of level funded impact aid for a number of years, and what's happening is really a combination of things. One is sequestration, which took place actually back in fiscal year 13, okay? We never adjusted the budget for that, okay? So now we're starting to catch up with that because we didn't have to adjust it because there were a lot of prior year payments coming out from the impact aid office. So those prior year payments were making up for all of that, so we were okay. They're starting to they're getting caught up on those prior year payments now. Then we've got that also. The application that we file is a year in arrears. They use the numbers from a year in arrears. And so the military population dropped last year a little bit. It's coming back this year. So we're seeing, it's a combination of things going on here. I hope $300,000 is enough of a drop to put up there on the screen, because potentially if FY16 sequestration comes back, that number is going to change significantly.
Dennis, but we set up a fund so that you didn't run into that,
Yes.
a complete.
That's right, and that's what this is
Shocking
about,
effect.
is trying to avoid that situation where we come down the road and say, uh-oh, we need $1 million, and we haven't planned for that. So this is gradually moving in the impact aid numbers so it stays in touch with what the real revenue
Do they
expectation.
give you according to student? I mean, so much
It is.
per student, and have they cut that rate down?
The rate's gone down, the number of students went down for us. There's so many factors that go into this. You may recall too that about 40% of the land in York County is owned by the federal government.
That's right.
We get a payment for that as well. Well, we're competing against every other state in the union, if you will, that has military property or federal property. And as it turns out, their properties may be going up at a faster rate than ours is, like in California. So, all these things come into play with this impact aid, and it's a very complex thing.
Are you talking about the value of the property going
Yes,
up in
yes.
California versus the value of the property
Well,
in
yes,
Virginia?
ma'am. What they do is they assign
That's
a
how they do
value
that.
to the federal property for those that qualify for that section of funding. In Virginia, York County and Craig County are the only two localities that qualify for Section 8002 funding. So we are it in Virginia. And
that's what I
Virginia,
thought.
York County happens to be one of the largest hitters in the nation for Section 8002.
Or is York County and San Diego?
San Diego is a very large hitter in this. So as those things, those numbers start changing, you can expect our number to change, especially if it's going on the downside. So, and if it goes up, our number changes favorably for us. But I am concerned, I don't want to understate this, I am concerned about FY16 from the sequestration standpoint. I know you've all been reading about it. It comes back in 16 unless Congress and the President decide to do something about that. So if they do not, and that comes forward and it makes it through, this number's not going to work.
Dennis, Tom Shepard and I were at a pancake breakfast on Saturday morning where Rob Whitman was there, and I had not a lengthy conversation, but this was a topic that we discussed with sequestration, what it would do to Hampton Roads, but also, our county, as far as the, what we receive from impact aid. And he assured me that they're working very hard up there to get that so it doesn't kick in again. Because they know the impact, it's not just going to be on York, it's going to be on many other localities across the country. So I'm holding to that and kind of monitoring that, but hopefully that's good news that they're doing,
And that's
they're
why
talking about it.
Yes, sir, and that's why we're not projecting sequestration up
No.
here, because we're optimistic something's going to change with
All
that.
these numbers are soft.
Yes, ma'am, very much so.
So if sequestration does hit, what do you think that number is going to do?
I don't even want to guess at that, Mr. Shepard.
Zero out or what?
Oh, no,
I
it
mean-
won't zero out, that I can assure you. But I'm not going to, I can't guess at that number right now.
Are we still?
It would be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, let me say
Are we
that.
still underfunded by the federal?
Oh,
formula?
yes, they underfund us about 50%. Yeah.
So was it about 3 million?
Actually, it'd be more than that, it'd probably closer to about 4 to 5 million at this point.
We're underfunded about 4 to 5 million. So we are actually subsidizing the federal government.
Yes, sir, that's one way of looking at it.
I knew
You
it
sure
was,
Doing
are.
that for a long
bad.
time.
I didn't know it had gotten that bad, so, yeah, for a long time.
Special ed's
right,
one
okay.
especially.
Dennis, what is our number for impact aid that we get now?
We budgeted this year $9,450,000, so this would bring that down to $9,150,000.
Do you recall what, in the past, what maybe the highest number that's been in the
That
past?
$9,450,000 is the highest it's ever been. And it's been at that level for a number of years. We haven't adjusted that for, I don't want to guess, but it's been quite a while.
And for those of you that are not familiar with the formula, which is I'm not 100% familiar with, but I've seen it, the idea is that for all federal-related families here, we put children in our schools, and we even have a school on what used to be federal property at Bethel. The federal government provides a offset somewhat, and then they have a formula that they follow. And I think of the 4 categories, if you look at that, we're ranked like number 1 in 2 of the 4 categories. We used to be ranked number 2 in the other 2 categories, and as Ms. Knoll pointed out, I think it was San Diego has the other offset. So when they ask the question, are we underfunded, the federal government created a formula that says this is how much the locality should receive if they have a federally related student in your school system. And the federal government has failed to meet meet their own formula to the tune, now you're saying about $4.5 million?
Yeah, when you consider both Section 8002 and 8003.
Okay, so when I talk about subsidizing, that means
You
based
are.
on their own formula, we are actually taking our tax dollars to keep the standards up, and that's the subsidy. And I thought our congressional delegation was going to try to do something on that.
Well, I would guess the best way to describe that would be at the federal level, trying to get any additional money put in any program right now is like pulling teeth, if you will. So I really don't expect impact aid to get an increase, as I wouldn't expect a lot of programs at this point to get an increase. Federal government's got a huge deficit problem, and they've got to deal with it, and so I don't anticipate any additional money coming to us from impact aid.
Thank you.
$16 trillion, I reckon, it's a deficit problem. Okay, so we got this, you've talked about this before. Now, when you say the VRS rate reduction, that is a reduction by the state on what, the localities, or?
The governor has proposed this. The governor has proposed reducing the VRS rate. It may not go through the General Assembly. It's just been a proposal. So if that does not go through, that rate reduction, then we will not see that savings of $222,000.
When will we know this?
When the General Assembly
budgets?
finishes their work, yes,
Okay.
sir.
What's the attrition, Dennis?
Excuse me?
What is the attrition
That's just from turnover. That's from turnover in the division. You know, when we have one senior teacher retire, and say someone comes in on step 0, I mean,
Sure,
we save
there's quite a
$25,000, $30,000 on one position.
So the attrition means that the person's left, now you get back to, you reset it.
Yes, sir.
So you've saving 1.2 million from,
Yeah, and that's a combination of
16.
this past year, or the current year we're in right now, and some from the previous year as well. So it's a combination of things. And that, you know, we talked about the surplus at the end of the year. This is one of the ways that we end up with that surplus, because we don't budget for future attrition. That's bad projections, because if it doesn't happen, you're going to have a deficit. So what we do is we wait for the attrition to occur, then we budget for it.
but you're projecting this 1.8 million will
Yes,
be
sir.
available for whatever you need to do in your operation budget?
Sir.
Okay.
Now, does that attrition number include whatever backfill there was, or there will be?
Yeah, it includes current salaries today versus what's been budgeted. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Now, so to address your compensation goal, make sure we're understanding, you're looking at, you want to increase a step?
Again, this is just preliminary information. This is just what it would cost if we went with a step.
One
This is
step.
what the cost would be, right.
This is not the recommendation of the school supervisor.
Right.
Mr. Shepherd, one of the things that we were very proud of this past year was we reset the teacher pay plan. We brought in a company, Evergreen, I believe it was.
Solutions.
And they did a lot of work with our staff. We saved a lot of money by doing a lot of work ourselves. And we rolled out the new reset, basically, of a pay plan for teachers. Well, we certainly don't want to stop the reset right after the first year, because then you're putting yourself right back in the same position again of having to revisit the pay plan. So that's the cost of us maintaining a step on the new one.
Even though we did come out with a new teacher pay plan, because of the freeze on steps, we still have teachers facing compression where they've been stuck on the same
Exactly.
pay scale for several years.
George?
So is the scale adjustment to address compression?
No, that's just
No.
one step. Like you would normally give a step increase each year to a teacher for seniority on the pay plan, but
So-
that does not address
So
compression.
what's the difference between a step and a scale adjustment?
We're
The
just,
scale adjustment is, to be frank about it, if you look at the non-licensed staff, a step is 2%. Just for presentation purposes, it's to equalize between the two employee groups. Because if we gave a step.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so if
Okay.
you gave a step to the licensed group, it would be a 1.4% average increase. Keep in mind, some employees would not get anything because they're on steps where there is no raise. So to equalize the 2% and the 1.4, it's just put up there for presentation purposes. It would be a 0.6% average increase in the scale to lift the scale up, and then everybody would end up with an average 2%. Some employees would not get anything of an increase if they're at the top of the scale.
It's
And
an
some would
effort
get
to make
more.
it
Some would
fair.
get more, exactly right.
George, was it your question on the difference between the step and the scale?
Yes.
Okay, I understand the step is just as you progress over years, but the scale is based on a comparison of jobs in your area, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so it's a job comparison. Now, the question I would have on this is, if no one's given a pay raise anywhere, how's the scale adjusting?
Well, as I was saying, this is done for presentation purposes to reflect if you did a 2% for both the groups, what the cost would be. That's what this slide is about. Okay, it's showing.
It's
that-
not showing that you're
2%
doing it,
of-
this is what it would be.
2% of who?
2% is the cost of providing a step for all of our non-licensed
Get that
staff.
part.
Okay, if you wanted to equalize that, this is what the factors would be. A step for non-licensed for teachers would be 1.4%, and then you adjust the scale by 0.6%.
see, the non-licensed scale adjusts.
Gobbledygook.
Okay, sorry.
And, Mr. Rishak, one of the things you brought up earlier too,
Massaging
when we
the
did the
numbers.
reset of the teacher pay plan, we could not afford to do any reset of the compression issues that we were facing and we're still facing, which was unfortunate, but we knew we still needed to step into moving to a new pay plan, which we did. We're hoping at some point to do something with a non-licensed plan to basically in the same shambles as the teacher pay plan was.
So if you design a new pay plan and you still have the compression issue, what have you accomplished?
Well, you're moving forward in something that's now doable, and then you deal with the compression if you can, and you can afford to do it.
The new
Thank
teacher
you.
pay plan kind of equalized
Yeah.
the raises, whereas before it looked like, you were hooked up to monitors at the hospital, the way it was up and down. And the new pay plan just kind of equalizes the pay raises over each year. And for instance, we increased their salaries on the pay plan, giving them a step last year. But we had so many teachers who had stayed on step 0 or step 5 that you have a teacher who has been in the school division for 6 years now, and he is now on step 1, along with a teacher who's been there 1 year. So it's a huge compression issue in the county.
I think municipalities all over the state are facing that right now.
Okay, so it's about this sample would be about $1.5 million
Yeah, roughly, yeah.
of new money.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any questions? When you say they're eligible for 5 steps, you're basing that on what? The old plan?
5-step freeze. 5
The
years
ones
they
that
were
frozen for
frozen
5
steps.
years.
Okay, all right.
So they missed those steps.
Okay, what's the difference between this slide and the one before?
This one shows you that we would, if we took an employee group that has suffered the longest and stayed with us, and we moved them up 1 step to restore to that particular group to do something with a little bit of the compression, that's what it would cost us to do it. That certainly would not cost to completely fix the entire compression issue, but the ones that have stuck in here the longest, been loyal to the YCSD, and has been harmed the longest, this would separate them a little bit more from.
Would this be an
In
addition?
other words,
Yes,
if
this is
you,
an
if you
addition.
could only
So this
do
is not
so
the same
much, this
information,
would be
it's
your
different.
priority first,
too.
before you did it across the board.
Okay,
Is that correct?
It's the cost of both. So the first slide represents a 2% increase for both staff. This slide represents if we were going to restore those steps for the folks that Mr. Medford indicated earlier about, that they've been here for 5
Been there
years.
for
It's
a
way to
while,
give them,
right.
right, it's a way to give them the
That's what I
step back.
thought.
so that was, so
So it's not across the board,
No, it's
so
not.
we're talking
Just that-
2.4
just the ones who are separate compression,
or 5
The
million?
ones who've missed
Okay.
5 years.
5 years.
So what percentage of the school divisions, licensed or non-licensed staff, is involved with the compression?
What was that? I didn't.
The non-licensed
Of the,
staff.
of the totality of your staff, what, 1,800 or so people?
Involved in the compression.
What percentage of those are affected by this this
I would be
compression?
guessing at that, but
Yeah.
I would guess probably about 70%. Because
70%.
remember, if I'm a teacher and I was let's say I was close to retirement and I retired over those last 6 years, you're out of the system. So there's no cost to us to restore a step for you because you're gone.
Right.
And so that's why the numbers go down just a little bit.
But that amounts to 70%.
But because remember, we're talking over a 6-year period. So yeah, we lose anywhere from probably 50 to 80 teachers a year. So. And this isn't just teachers, this is all staff.
We can get you a breakdown and email it or send it to you so you can kind of really look at the
Well,
percent.
these are all soft numbers,
Right.
as the superintendent's mentioned, so as we get further along, I think those issues will be more important.
We'll get better
Yeah.
numbers later on.
I don't think we need it right now, but.
Okay, any other questions? Okay,
No.
next slide. So when do you normally change out a bus?
The recommended is, the 14-year, 200,000 mile, or when maintenance really oversteps and you're spending more money to maintain the bus than you would be to replace it in some cases. But these are recommended. Dennis, we haven't been in this kind of predicament in a long time. I think we ended up having to do a lease purchase at one point when we got ourselves to the point where we had to do something with our fleet. But this just reflects on the fact that we see this problem coming down the train track, and It's almost here, and we need
So
to.
do you need to buy 23 buses in 2016? I mean, do you need funding for 23 buses? Is that what you're saying here, or just?
If you'll give me the funding for 23, we'll
Yeah,
do it.
yeah, we'll take it.
So, no,
These things
we're not
cost
saying that we
$100,000
need it. What we're saying is we
That's
need
roughly
to
about 80,000.
make a reasonable, we just need to chip away at this, so to speak. So I think our normal replacement cycle was 7 years, right, Carl? 7 years. So we've been replacing 7 buses per year, and 5 or 6 years ago, my understanding is that stopped due to, where we
funding.
are.
Right.
So, and while that happens, our vehicle parts and supplies costs obviously go up as we're having to make sure that we, provide the necessary support for our fleet, so to speak. So that's sort of where we're at. And the idea is, we talked about this, I think, at the last meeting as well, because we've been able to save some dollars on fuel recently. If we have some funds there that we're saving on fuel, we're going to turn that around and buy a bus or two with those dollars.
So you're trying to you want to go back to the 7-year, or do you need to kind of, because you've got so many old buses, you need to accelerate it like 9 or whatever?
I think to Mr. Zaremba's point earlier, as we have end-of-the-year funds, if the monies are there, we want to refurbish technology as well, but we know we do have to, we have a number of things that we need to work on, so we need to look at both. So if we have extra funds there, we need to make sure that we tend to those needs for buses. Again, with the transportation, fuel money, if we can buy them there. But we do need to get on a schedule of replenishing our buses. We need to get back to some sort of schedule to do that.
What's the going rate on a bus?
110,000?
It's between $90,000 and $100,000.
Let's just say 100,000.
How is the aging bus fleet affecting your availability? Availability of buses to pick up students?
It's not necessarily affecting our availability, but I can tell you it's affecting, it's going to affect our supply and vehicle maintenance. It's going to, obviously when you have an older bus, my car has 150,000 miles on it, so I've got to put more money in it to keep it running. So that's the one thing. But as far as availability, we're not having significant issues with that. But I don't want to get into a position where we wake up and we have 15 buses that aren't going to get on the road. So that's why we have to chip away at it.
So the matrix down at the bottom is just telling us, right now, the preliminary input or data for fiscal year 16, if you had the means, you'd replace 23 buses. Does that sound, I'm reading that?
Right.
8 of them, 9 of them because they're 14 years old. Now, you wouldn't replace them, of course, just because they're 14 years old if they're
No,
totally operational and.
Right. We would prioritize those. We would
Yeah.
certainly look at those 23 and say, here's the 3 or 4 that need to be replaced right now, and we'd utilize those funds to make sure we replace them.
The same thing with 200,000 miles. I mean, that's a lot of mileage, but Mr. Wiggins gets about 250,000 miles out of his cars before he replaces them, so that might be just a benchmark.
That's right.
But yeah.
Well, I'll have to give kudos to Bobby Johnson and our bus garage and the mechanics and the maintenance down there. They do a phenomenal job with the buses and keeping them on the road and keeping them safe and keeping them running. And a lot of preventative maintenance to keep them going. The county does the same thing. I mean, wonderful job.
Otherwise, it might be 10 years or 100,000.
Exactly.
When we're talking about buses, every year, I know I've received a couple complaints based on observations, buses going through neighborhoods with no kids on them. Okay, and to me, it's like, where do you begin on your route kind of thing? But what's the ridership on the bus fleet?
Well, Tom, I can speak to say that we have a computer program that maps out our bus routes, the most efficient, where the bus stops will be, the timing. We even got our buses equipped with, we know when the buses are actually stopping and picking up children. Elementary, they all ride the bus, we know that. So we have to run the route. Your middle schoolers are riding the bus. They, for the most part, we do have parents dropping off elementary and middle school in some cases, but the ridership's higher. When you get to high school, that's where you still got to run the route because that kid may decide to get on that bus that morning. That the children may decide to ride with a friend, or they may decide to drive themselves if they're allowed to, if they got a parking permit. But you still got to run the route. And so our systems run the route, so when sometimes somebody sees a bus that's empty going into a school, most likely it's probably going to be a high school bus, and it's just because the ridership's low that day. We can't cut a route just because we know that that child may get on the bus that day. So we just have to run the route, if that makes any sense.
Well, I mean, I understand, is the state code mandate that we
Yeah,
provide bus service?
transportation. It is. Is it not? It is.
If you, we have some schools that have walking zones and where we have to employ a crossing guard. We do have, like Bethel Manor, they walking, but the further out, we do provide some buses for, so it's not such a long walk. But then, yeah.
And if I may add, Mark, the state does say you have to have a transportation system for getting your children to school. We even looked at one point of outsourcing that, and it was too costly to do that. So we stayed with what we have. And if you remember over the years in the past how we reduced the budget and we went to transportation and non-classroom activities first to balance the budget. And over the course of now 6 years, you step back, you reevaluate to say, we may have cut a little bit too much in that area. Now it's trying to catch up a little bit and make have our children being safe on the highway.
This might be a good time to give a plug out that we need bus drivers, so if you all know anyone.
You need bus
But
drivers.
we all may
Who
be
wants
on
that
the
job?
bus driving.
We desperately need bus drivers.
I think Mr. Zaremba's looking for a job.
He raised his
He
hand,
raised his
God.
hand, he's ready for it.
We'll have an
I
official
already
shirt
raised
for him
my
after the
hand.
meeting.
I'm a volunteer.
Okay, any other questions on this slide?
I
Next
want to
one.
be on that bus if you're driving. Sorry.
To move on.
What kind of yearly, I thought it used to be like 6-year cycle for renewal of technology in a school. What's that doing now?
Well, what you see up on the screen there for storage networks and servers, we're really trying to stay on a 5-year refresh
5
cycle
years.
for that. That's the stuff that drives the system. The computers themselves, the monitors and those kinds of things, we have some of them out there 7, 8, 10 years old. But this is the stuff that drives everything. This is the train, if you will, that's pulling all the equipment along. And you see, I will point out while we're on this slide, that totals up to about $800,000. As I was mentioning to you earlier, if we really wanted to fully fund technology, that number really needs to be closer to about 1.4 million on an annual basis. That's an annual recurring basis. And what that would do, that would allow us to do the refresh on the hardware infrastructure on a 5-year basis, and it would probably allow us to do computers on a more frequent basis, not what the industry recommends, which is probably a 3 to 4 year basis, but it would be much more frequent than we're doing now.
Yeah, I think we place a lot of emphasis on moving into the technology, but that technology is expensive. And I watched my grandson, 3-year-old grandson, just turned 3, with a mouse. And I told him, that's a mouse. No, it's not. That's something, but it's not a mouse. But, the idea, but within 2 days, he was using the mouse with the cursor to click on videos for, like, toys with train, or trains for kids and things like that. So, if you have a child that has that advantage, that's great, because when they move into it, they're going to want to use more of it. But I think not necessarily all the children have that advantage, and they'll get it in the schools, maybe in the library, but they're going to need it if we're going to compete in the world. So that's important, and I think we all recognize that too. Okay,
That's it.
great. We'll go around and
Go back to that last slide, if you could, please, the last slide. That's $800,000, and that's for, like, what you're saying, it's a 1-year upgrade. What would it cost, just to give us a sense of, if you had to replace your entire technology with new stuff, what are we talking about? What race, what's the percentage of everything is that? Any idea?
I don't know that number.
We bounced the number around in the office about a
Yeah,
month
sure you
ago.
have. Yeah.
And the IT person gave me a number, and I said, I know that's not right, because I signed the requisitions, and I know what we've bought.
Right.
And to give you an idea, the infrastructure, the wiring that we have in our schools, which was put in back in probably the mid-2000s, we spent probably $15 to $20 million just putting the wiring in all the buildings. We probably have $15 to $20 million in equipment in all of our buildings today. It's huge, the investment we have in technology. But part of that technology investment is set now. That wiring is in the building, so that's not something that we're looking to replace. That stays the way it is. What these dollars you're looking at up here are for major pieces of technology like servers. What the plan is, if these funds were available, what we would most likely end up having to do is do a lease purchase for this infrastructure. Because to fully do all of this in 1 year, it'd be about $4 million. So if we do a lease purchase over about 5 years, we can make that work for this $8,000. And it makes sense to do that because you don't want to spike every 5 years of $4 million to replace servers. That's no way to budget for technology. So it makes more sense to kind of spread this out on an annual basis. So that's what we're trying to
And
do.
Dennis, what about working with the county, so when the county has to replace, you all have one budget to handle the replacements?
I think that's something to be explored. I honestly do, and that's something that we've looked at in the past, and we need to keep that I guess let me say, that dialogue open at all times. I agree with that 100%.
Mr. Jerry, one of the major issues too is bandwidth.
In fact, if you look at your the school board CIP, and you actually improved this in your CIP a year ago, there's millions of dollars in those out years to put fiber optic cabling out in our division, which we don't have in our schools. If our IT person was here, he would probably tell you that the bandwidth needs in our division are growing exponentially. And, you know, when you have kids bring devices, Dr. Shandor can talk to you about the bring your own technology that we have in our division. It's a huge advantage to our students, but it comes at a cost. And you're trying to maintain the infrastructure to maintain that is a challenge.
But this, that slide basically shows hardware, I mean, essentially hardware.
Now, not all hardware, just major.
It's really the software providing the programs to our kids that the value of this stuff comes into play, right? In other words, we can walk through any school in the division and see good-looking TVs up on, you know, up there, not in operation. We can look down the hall, go down the hallway and see these different pieces of infrastructure. But the value to our children is not in the hardware as much as it is in how can that geography teacher use the software? How can that math teacher teach algebra, geometry, trigonometry, calculus, and so on and so forth? Isn't there a major cost associated with that?
We're not even talking software here, but yes, there's a huge cost to that. We have probably budgeted $500,000 for software a year in our IT budget, not to mention instruction also budgets it for
Have
software.
you ever done an analysis to get a handle on to what degree are the teachers really using that stuff? Have you ever done that kind of thing?
We do,
Oh,
in
yeah.
fact.
Okay.
Yes.
I assume you do,
We
but
do. We do.
maybe, don't just give me the.
Yeah, well, we do. I mean, I don't have the statistics right in front of me to talk through it, but we certainly do. Our instructional department, Len Dunvito and Reggie Fox, and under Dr. Guy's leadership, we have an agreement with WHRO, and actually Cindy went to a meeting with us last week, and we looked at usage for, and I'll give you one example. When you talk about discovery education and how much our teachers use that one, then that's just one of many. We were sort of blown away with how much they use that. So, and that's just one program. So we do track that, we do review that information often, and because then, again, when you have Discovery Ed, then there's other competing interest in wanting to take over and come in, but we have to look out for what's best for our teachers and what's best for our teachers to use with our kids.
Yeah.
So we certainly review that information.
And I want to commend our new superintendent, because he's out there right now with focus groups in every school, talking to teachers and students and finding out exactly how the BYOT program is working today and evaluating that. So that's ongoing.
Bring your own
Technology.
Bring your own technology.
Right. And I can tell you our staff, they're not shy, so they're giving me good feedback.
Good.
Well, in fact, that's I think a good example of why it's important to go down and visit the schools. Go with your counterpart. I know that when Robbie and I did it last year, we went to the elementary school and to the high school, and we'd walk into the class, and you would watch and see that technology being used. And also, if you go to, I was invited over at Tab Elementary School for the reading program, and I decided to bring I had a college level history book, and part of this was just talking about area around Turkey and whatnot, because that's a lot of the ancient history. And I said, well, do you have a map? And I'm sitting around looking for an old pull-down map, and the teacher goes, no, wait a second, and this thing comes down, and then boom, there's the technology, and I'm going, wow, okay. So I mean, there was no map drawing, there was no old dusty whatever, and I was pretty impressed. I mean, the kids were that's what they expected to see, and they were all kind of built in that to the program, and it was great discussion. And I've seen it where you go into the high school. I remember seeing that in the math program. I saw it where they were using the technology of looking at some, I can't remember they were looking at some chemical interaction stuff, and it's just watching that technology use was great, and it's really progressed a lot. So I definitely will encourage that.
You don't look that old.
What?
You don't look that old.
Thank you. That's not what my wife says.
Pull down map.
But like one of the mandates from the state, Mr. Shepherd, about every student has to take an online class, or, all your SOL testing has to be done online. We have to have the infrastructure to power that, of course, which we do, and then we got to maintain. So that's what you're looking at here. But you're right, these students that we're preparing to walk out our doors on graduation day, the ones that at least, even to enter the career tech field that Paige is quite familiar with, they got to know how to use technology. I mean, I remember, the CADS program where they used to do mechanical or architectural drawing by hand. Now it's all done by computer. So it's just, we have to prepare for that, and you mentioned that, so you're absolutely correct.
One of the things I've just, if we're talking about a new school later, in our presentations, future meetings, wiring the school, you talk about wiring school, and I heard that, and I'm kind of going, wow, where's all this wireless technology? Because you have a lot of you have a lot of servers and the routers and everything you keep in a central location, and I don't know, use an old term like a server farm, but you can still you can broadcast the wireless all over the building, and we have it in our homes, and that reduces all that wiring and fiber optics and whatnot.
Well, when you walk into our buildings, there has to be the wireless points are all through the building, so the wires have to be run to the points, and there's bunches of those throughout the school to get the coverage you need. We have a really good wireless infrastructure in our school division that powers our the devices that our students are using in the classroom and such, beyond the wired devices. So, but you're right, we might find some savings.
Okay, well, I think, go around, and if we start this in, go around and see if anybody's got anything you want to bring up in this discussion.
I'm good. I just want to say thank you for the joint work session, and very informative, I think, listening to both sides, and appreciate the opportunity.
Don?
I'd like to put a plug in for one of my favorite schools in York County.
Go right ahead.
Seaford Elementary. Now, I've been there quite often. I don't live far away from there. And they had a Christmas program where they had singing. The kids were singing. Every kid in the school was singing in the gymnasium. And they had half the gymnasium blocked off for the children, and they were in rows. And then the other half was for the parents and grandparents and those of us that came. But before the musical started, they invited me to come into the library and see what they do in the early morning hours when they first start off the schoolwork. And they had these two little girls. I don't know how old they were, but they weren't but about this high. And they were at a table. And they were TV commentators, these two little girls were. And as it happens, every classroom has a shade that you can pull down. And these little girls were on TV for all the classrooms. And they talked about what was going to happen that day, the menu they were going to have, and they would back to you. You know how they do on TV. And this is what it was, and I was amazed. I said, there's nobody. I said, are we the only ones? No, it goes into each classroom. I was amazed at that, the technology that these little kids know how to work. And of course, the musical was great. And, but there are just so many things that go on there now that I wouldn't have a clue if I was coming along. I'd be lost, I'll tell you.
Never too old.
And I'll
Never
say
too
this
old.
too. All of the teachers there are great, and the principal's awesome. It's just a great school, and I'm sure all of our schools are that way in York County, I suppose. But that's the one I'm more familiar with because I've been there so many times.
Okay, great. Walt?
Yeah, just, first of all, I think this was a good first start, actually a second start, since this is the second time we've met. But given the nature of the numbers and the soft nature of these numbers, I think we've got to meet, again, I think by this time next month, if not a little bit sooner. As soon as as soon as you two and your staffs get a feel that some of these numbers are starting to look bold, we need a program, another joint meeting, and go from there, because this is a great exchange of information, but we can't really sink our teeth into it at this point in time. And, so that's my comment. Keep this on track. Yeah.
I wanted to know, this has been a good first start, and we have a long ways to go, and we owe it to our community to do as much as we can for them. And Don, we've got 19 schools, and we love all 19.
Well, I love them too, but I like this one just a little bit better.
And I think I'm gonna get Walt to Don or Dr. Seuss hat, and we're gonna go read Across America at Magruder and Wall Mill.
While we do that, we're going to check utilization of the hardware software.
Oh, yeah.
We need some pictures of him with that hat on, please.
Yeah, yeah. You know what,
I don't need the hat.
technology runs throughout the whole curriculum.
Yeah.
And along with that goes professional development and getting our teachers on board. So kudos to our staff and our teachers and administrators, because what you saw earlier of the accomplishments couldn't have been done without them and their dedication.
Qualification, yeah.
Okay, Sheila?
Yes, I just want to say thank you very much for putting this together again tonight. As Walt says, this is just the beginning, but I am so pleased that our staffs are working together behind the scenes at this point, and so that we have a commonality when we have the numbers when they come before us, when they're not as soft as they are tonight. Thank you very much.
I think this has been a wonderful meeting, very productive. But I also want to thank you guys, because the Board of Supervisors, because as you have seen the federal money and the state money decline, the burden's been placed on you five. And you've been very kind to the school system. You may not give us exactly what we want every year, but you do work with us. And I think this year it's been a very productive meeting. And I just want to thank you for supporting the schools.
Great. Bobby?
I too am very excited about hopefully a new chapter here. We had a great meeting last week, I guess, chair, vice chair of each board and the superintendent and Mr. Carter. The discussion headed towards let's do this together. Let's have some common goals. I think that the community wants that. I think we're more productive that way. We need to have unity, and our goals really overlap. They should be the same goals. I just like I almost hesitate to say, but I'd like to just point out, that the tragic death of this young man, this student, to me suggests a couple of things. One, we're fortunate that this hasn't happened any more than it has, because some places it does. Number two, law enforcement was tremendous, but it also points out the fact that relationship between school, keeping these kids engaged, and the statistics that suggest academic achievement and crime, they're related. And it just kind of really reiterates the fact that we've got to not go backwards. We need to engage these kids. We need to do everything we can do. We need to fund our law enforcement, and keep everybody safe. It's just kind of a reminder, maybe a wake-up call for all of us. It puts things in perspective a little bit. So I know that you will be mindful of all those things as you progress with your budget, and certainly we're anxious to see how that goes.
George?
I appreciate the interaction, the staff's input into all the data that we've been giving. All this information is foundational to what we're going to be building our budgets on in the future. And it's important to have that basis, that knowledge, so we can make educated decisions on what we're going to do with the money. So I appreciate the information, and we'll see where it goes from here.
What can I say? Y'all said it all. But collaboration, united on some common goals, a great idea, I think, that came out of our chair, vice chair discussions, working together. York County as a whole, as we advocate for public education. Y'all have a lot of things on your plates that you have to balance and work with. But as we come together, we do what's right for the county. We do what's right for our employees. We do what's right for our customers, in our case, the students. So this has just been a great meeting. We look forward to the next one scheduled, and the future scheduled meetings of the chair, vice chair, and the interim county administrator, and our superintendent, Dr. Shandor. And I just want to say kudos to Dr. Shandor and his staff, his leadership team, and his executive leadership team. They are working themselves to the bone, and at the same time working very closely with Mark Carter and his staff on the county side, so that there's no surprises. Everybody knows as we move forward. So, thank you.
Yeah, one of the meetings, the flow of communications and understanding of how the facts are built really will cut down on a lot of consternation, I think, later, and it'll help us. We don't know yet where we're going, and we're looking for, in terms of this budget. Our staff has been working this for a long time and building it up, so we see that going. But it's going to go through the process. But the communications has been enhanced, and that we need to continue to press forward and do that. One thing I want to convey was an observation. You talked about the meeting at Tabb Elementary School that we attended with Congressman Whitman, and that was a setting in which the community, in this particular case the Kiwanis, came in, and they were doing an event to, as their charter basically calls them to do, to support that school. Okay. And at that opportunity, I kind of went over there with the expectation that I would see, people from within just that area. And I was amazed that I was running into people from Newport News and Hampton, and it was amazing just to see how many different groups and from where they were coming from. But I sat down and I would ask, okay, do you go to this school? Do you go to school? Of course, the kids are very proud of their school, and they would write out there and tell you yes. One of the things that really struck me is I met a young couple, Navy, that were from Oklahoma. They had researched. They were coming over here, and he is stationed in Norfolk, and they had researched where they wanted to put their school or the kids. And what they found on, I don't remember which program it was online, but they were looking at schools, best schools and things like that. It was Tabb Elementary School, and they moved into the district to send their kids to the school, even though he would have to face that traffic of getting over in Norfolk. I met another young lady who had 2 children. Her husband was is a pilot in the Air Force, and they're getting ready to PCS. So they had been here for the tour, and he was out now deployed, actually supporting the war against the terrorists. And she was home and had the 2 children, and she's going to school because she had put her career on hold for a while. The point in that was that she felt really comfortable being in a school that was surrounded by a lot of folks with a common sense and purpose. One, people wanted education. They wanted their children well educated. They put an emphasis on education, and the way she just loved the school. I mean, the way she talked about it was really emotional. And I met a couple others. The same idea. To that goes to what you just said, Robbie, that if you tie in the value of what the school and the community and the parents bring to the program, it helps with reducing crime. It helps the property values. It makes our environment much better to live. And I think our teachers can see it firsthand. They probably feel a lot safer teaching in this particular area than they would maybe in some of the others. So it was just observations. I saw that. So I would encourage, again, we take an opportunity, if you can, in your schedule to go visit the schools. I know Robbie and I have one more school that we need to see Tab Middle School, and we're going to schedule to go do that, and I think, Dr. Sandra, you're going to go along with us on that one. So I'm really anxious to see that, and so we'll just continue the communications. So I want to thank you very much for, coming down and giving us presentation and working with us, and great work by the staff, and we look forward to the next one. So with that, I will adjourn the meeting.
All right.
And we will go, actually, we will not adjourn, we'll adjourn the joint meeting, and then we're going into now the Board of Supervisor meeting.
We're going to adjourn the school board meeting. Thank you.
Adjourn to home, okay. All right, we're now moving into the Board of Supervisor meeting, a regular meeting, work session for February 3rd. I guess we need to do a roll call again, so I got an agenda here, so, okay.
I don't know that you're required to, but you certainly
We
may.
don't
It is-
need-
it is a phase two. I mean, you've already had a meeting. This is,
Okay, well, everybody's still
Just
here, so the
recess
roll
to
call's still in
reconvene.
effect. Let's see, this is the work session. We got through the joint work session, we're done. So we're going to the first item on the agenda is the consent calendar.
Yes, sir. You have 3 items on the consent calendar, the minutes from the January 6th meeting, and you have an employee of the quarter resolution, Mr. Brett Cowan from the General Services Department. And then the final item is the purchasing authorization. This would reauthorize a 5-year contract dealing with the household chemical disposal program that's operated by, it's actually a private company, but this is all the stuff you can't take to the landfill, and this would continue that program that's offered periodically at the facility down on Goodwin Neck Road for all the citizens in the county. So we'd recommend approval of the consent calendar.
Okay, anyone wants to pull anything, George?
I just have a question on the procurement action on the VIPSA contract. It says that the most notable change is the reduction in many of the unit costs charged, and the estimated cost of this program is $90,000. So how did that change from the last 5-year contract? Did it go down, or is there any savings that we're going to realize?
Well, Brian, do you have the details? Can you speak to that?
Actually, Steve Geisler from VIPSA, the executive director, is here, but Clean Harbor, the private contractor, actually reduced their unit costs for the disposal of the hazardous material.
So is this $90,000 less than the last 5-year contract, or?
No, it's still, the budget is $90,000 a year. That covers both disposal and the services for the collection day. But it's a very small drop in the unit prices.
Okay, so it's not an appreciable difference?
No.
Okay, any other questions?
If there are no questions, I'll move the consent calendar.
Okay, Ellen?
The motion made by Mr. Zaremba is to approve the consent calendar as submitted. Mr. Zaremba?
Yes.
Mrs. Knoll?
Yes.
Mr. Ritchie?
Yes.
Mr. Wiggins?
Yes.
Mr. Shepherd?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, we now open discussion. Don, anything you want to talk about?
Is this all we had on the
That's
agenda?
it. Pretty short. Well, we have a closed session, but
Do we have a
Well,
closed session?
One of the things I wanted to mention was the fact that I really do appreciate all that the school board does, and that we do. We have a wonderful education system here in York County, and but of course we have a budget that we have to go by, and it's going to be another tough year most likely for us. But somehow or other we'll work through it. And I appreciate the meeting tonight. I thought it was great. And of course we'll have plenty more of these before we get through with this budget. But I look forward this year to working with them and to see if we can't come to terms with them. And I'd like the people and the people with children in the schools to know that we do all we can do here as supervisors to fund our schools, and we do appreciate the quality of our schools here in York County. The fact that we know why people move to York County, and a large part of it has to do with school system. And then, of course, we have other things that it has to do with too, fire and life safety, and that's about over 70% of our money goes to the schools and fire and life safety. And then we use the other 30% to run the county. So it means a lot to us to be able to do this. So this is going to be an interesting year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well? Yeah, I have one thing. Last night, I was at one of our numerous boards, and specifically the Colonial Community Criminal Justice Board. It's a board that has representation from 6 jurisdictions: Poquoson, York County, James City County, New Kent, Gloucester, and Charles City County. Right? Sitting around this table, every police chief or sheriff or his representative is at this board. Most of them were the chiefs themselves, the police officers, the police chiefs or sheriffs. Right? And then there were the staff, the full-time staff that runs this CCC program, okay? The Colonial Community Justice. And the mission of this whole thing is, it's a state-mandated program. It's to get a handle on the kids coming out of our juvenile jails, not just juvenile, but also kids that might be in the adult system as well. And they track their probation, they track their meeting the requirements that are set out by the judges when they're brought before the judge and so forth. And what was really interesting about last night is the fellow, Jack Fitzgerald, who's sort of the guy in charge of the program, a fully paid guy, he showed a video. And the video, to all these people here, all sorts of law enforcement folks, and we were up in New Kent last night, and it was put on by students out at the College of William and Mary, and they went into the YouTube and pulled out segments of what's on the YouTube with respect to the effect of drugs on teenagers, high school, college, middle school, and so forth. I thought it was an incredibly piercing, effective program. And my first question last night was, to what extent is this shown in our schools? This kind of all right? Because we all know, and of course we just had an incident a week ago, killed one of our teenagers, all right? Apparently associated with drugs, from what we read out of the newspapers. And I said, the answer I got from Jack, who heads up this program, right, is they've tried to go, I didn't want to mention this tonight with the school division, they have tried to bring this program into the schools, right, either through the resource officers or through whatever, and basically none of the schools in York County will touch it with a 10-foot pole. And he was almost just as critical of the other jurisdictions as well, because the parents won't have it. The parents won't agree to it, okay? And I said, well, what are you talking about? The school division, okay, at the principal level, principals at the schools, okay, don't want to have that program come into the schools, not because it's not extremely educational, and it gets right to the root of a problem, but at least this is the explanation from the guy running the program. The reason behind the school's principal's refusal to bring this kind of stuff in is because the majority of the parents won't have it. They don't want the schools trying to educate their students with respect to the effects of use of drugs. It's our responsibility. We don't want you meddling on that. I found it rather interesting to get that kind of a kickback.
Yeah, that doesn't sound right to me.
If I may, this brings up a very
Yeah.
a good point. We have a channel, a county channel, that I keep saying needs programming updated.
Yeah.
Is there some reason why that program could not be used? Is it a long program?
No,
Is it
no,
short?
no, it's 8 minutes.
8-minute video.
Yeah.
I think something like that is educational, and we should put it on our channel if
I can
quote
I can
unquote.
get the CD.
Right,
Yeah.
if quote unquote, the parents don't want it in the schools. Now, is there something about it that, do you think that by seeing it, you would encourage people to use drugs?
Well, the whole purpose of it, certainly with the group in this room, was to show the incredibly serious effects associated with using drugs, whether it's
Whatever.
marijuana, opium, spice,
Well, you know what,
it's all out there apparently, so.
we take government classes. I'm a docent for the York Women's Club. And in conjunction with the judges and the lawyers and the school system, we take students to first of all, through the court system to show them what it's like, and hopefully that's the only time they'll
Right.
get into a courtroom. And then we take them to the jail. And at the jail, we have displays of paraphernalia that they have confiscated from prisoners, and they talk about the gangs, and they talk about the drugs, and it's very, very informative. And if we take them to show them this, I think something like this would be very, very valuable
All of us around.
to put on
Yeah.
television.
Yeah, maybe we ought to try to just.
We probably should
dialogue with the school division and. No?
Yes, I think so, but I see no reason why we couldn't put it on Channel 46.
I was astonished that if the kickback, as mentioned, was true, I was astonished that, but it's all because of the liability issue.
Whatever.
Walt,
The
a few
parents
years
won't
ago,
allow it, okay?
a few years ago, the sheriff's department put on a program similar to what you're talking about.
Uh-huh.
And they went to the schools, and it would be after hours. And it was more for the parents, or just as much for the parents as it was for the children. Parents brought their children, and it would fill up a whole room. I went to several of them. A room this size, and it would just fill it up with parents and their children. And the deputies would talk about the same thing you're talking about, and show a film on what would happen to people that get hooked up on those drugs.
That's what this video shows.
Yeah, and I mean, there was
series of
the parents.
yeah,
I mean, the
vignettes.
parents brought their children, and made them listen there, and it doesn't make any sense to me that the parents would object to it.
I'm just telling you what, and these are,
right.
all the honchos with respect to our safety in the peninsula.
Let me bring it up. I like, it's great suggestions coming out of here. We ought to be able to do something, Mark, get it on TV, and let's start, and you'll get us the
I'll get
program.
the-
And then
I'll get you all the
talk to the
copies.
schools. Let's kind of find out what's really going on in regards to the resistance there. I was a parent, I was like, no. I want to take your baby, not babysit my kids,
Yeah.
you're training them and you're teaching them, and this part of teaching life is, I think, can have some value. So, anything else?
No, that's it for tonight.
But they brought up the gangs in this too. And what about getting into gangs, and what would happen then?
No, I would just like to thank Mr. Wiggins for being the first person to sign up for a community garden plot.
Yeah.
And Thank you, Don. You're setting a good example.
I signed my wife up now.
Okay, I understand about 1/4 of the plots are already gone, and I hope that people listening will consider them, because March 1st, you can start, the ground is broken and you can start planting, so please take advantage of it.
Okay, great. George? Okay. I just one part, this is me and my opportunity to talk to the public. And one of the things I want to point out, most of us have heard about the horrendous situation, what happened with the terrorist treatment of that Jordanian pilot.
Oh, I haven't heard
And,
of
they
Yes.
burned him alive.
They burned him alive.
Put him in a cage and burned him alive. It's the most horrific, horrendous, terrible, barbaric thing you can do. And any human being with a conscience would be absolutely not only repulsed, but enraged by that type of behavior. And so often I sit and wonder, well, as I've gotten older, what do I got to do? How do I participate in protecting my country? And how, because sometimes you feel that, okay, I'm too old to go out. We served in the military. I flew jets. You were in the Army, and your husband's in the Navy, and we did what we had to do at our time in youth. But our generation is getting older, and the military is getting older, so it's getting smaller. Finances are taking its toll, but we still have to defend our country. For us, I'm kind of like, what do we do? What do we do as individuals at the local level? And over time you'll hear this discussion, but I want to give a point that I think is very, very important. It goes to everything we talked about tonight. It talks about our community. It talks about our children. It talks about what we as Americans feel is important. And often I've seen statistics on people attending religious service or church, and part of that I want to say to the public. I've seen that the attendance for churches have dropped. Now, I understand there's probably maybe 25%, and it used to be much greater. Right. And there's a lot more going on in the activities in the world. But one of the things I do want to stress is that the faith-based organizations have a tendency to really teach you the right and wrong, the understanding of humanity, and understanding your part in the world, and how our nation is kind of glued together. And I'm not talking about just one religion. I mean, if you look at Christianity on itself, you got all the different kind of churches. If you look at, you can then expand from that. And we're a country that's based on freedom of religion and respect, and how we treat each other. And we base this as, if you look at it, if you're a Sikh, the Hindu, Buddhist, Shinto, you just go down the list. In all of these, one of the things you see is an understanding and appreciation of life and the value and how to treat your fellow man. So at this point, I thought about it, and in our population, and every small town, every local government needs to step up and say, this is not only not acceptable, but you need to think inside of how you can strengthen your country and how you protect your population. And one of the ways you do that is by imparting a sense of right and wrong in your community and to your children. If you don't, then tell them what you're going to get. I would hate to, in fact, one of the things, I hate using the word hate, but the idea is, I worry about my 3-year-old grandson that you'll hear me talk about a lot. What kind of world that 3-year-old grandchild, and I got a granddaughter on the way, what kind of life are they going to face? And the people that would do this horrendous crime, and the way they devalue the value of 50% of the world population, which are women, is just not acceptable. So we need to step up and start thinking about how you can strengthen your community. Today I will say, I recommend right now, if you haven't thought about your faith-based organization, then step up and do so. I just think that's very, very important to the history, not only in our country, but to the future and what we've done. So anyway, that's my point, and I'll get more fired up over this subject, and I'll take an opportunity to say something about it. But what I'm seeing in the world, especially in the Middle East today, is just not only unacceptable, it's inhuman. And we need to be able to start protecting our country. So,
Worst thing I see about that is the beheadings, when they chop somebody's head off. That's awful.
of course it is. It's barbaric is what
Yeah.
it is. And but we're seeing that for reasons that I mean we're seeing it in Mexico, South America. We're seeing relationship between gangs and the Islamic terrorists. We're seeing this, and we as a nation will not accept that. We feel more protected in our borders, but we got to convey that over. And thank God for our great military, our folks that are out there in front.
That's why we've got to get Congress to get the funding back up for our military, too.
Yeah, doing their number one duty, protecting our country. Okay, with that, Mr. Vice Chairman, please take us to closed session.
In accordance with Section 2.2-3711A1 of the Code of Virginia, I move the Board of Supervisors convene in closed meeting to consider personal matter involving the appointment of individuals to boards and commissions.
Ellen?
Mrs. Knoll?
Yes.
Mr. Riczak?
Yes?
Mr. Wiggins?
Yes.
Mr. Zaremba?
Yes.
Mr. Shepherd?
Yes.
Motion carries
Okay,
unanimously.
we'll move to closed session.